So far we've discussed two different photo editing styles. The first one was black and white photo editing, and the second one was complementary colors. This time we're going to discuss a new style, and that is by achieving a film look. So we're going to try to mimic a film look with our digital photography. Now obviously, to achieve a film look, the best possible way would be to shoot film. However, I don't shoot film yet, even though I have my Nikon SLR ready for a film right there, but I haven't tried that yet. So in order to achieve a film look, if we take a look at some film photography, we can see that what stands out most is grain, some washed out colors. There are a bit of color shifts, normally towards the green and magenta, and some lack of clarity as well. The problem with mimicking film look with digital photography is the fact that digital photos tend to have very good clarity and focus, so in order to achieve a film look, we need to work around those problems. So let's take a look at how we can do this in a few simple steps in Lightroom Classic. So as always, I've gone ahead and imported some photos in order to show you the film look method on these particular shots, and I'm going to start with this shot I took actually with my phone. The first thing we need to do with a shot such as this is to play around with the tone curve. Now, in order to achieve a look that mimics film, we need to first and foremost crush the blacks, but we need to make sure that our blacks are not too dark. So we need to raise the first point, which is the darkest part of our blacks, and decrease the shadows even further in order to remove any detail in the shadows, because film look typically has much less detail in the shadow areas. So if we zoom in right here, we have lost a lot of detail in this area in particular. In order to achieve this look that lacks detail in the shadow areas, I'm going to play around a bit further with contrast, with my shadows and with the blacks, and then I'm going to adjust the temperature slightly in order to mimic the color casts typically seen in film look. Due to the fact that film photos typically lack a bit of texture and clarity, I'm going to reduce texture and clarity by a bit, not too much because we don't obviously want to lose a lot of that clarity in the photo. Next, I'm going to go to the color grading part, and this is where we're going to play around with color a bit further. And I'm going to go to my shadows, and I'm going to introduce a bit of teal looks in my shadows. Then I'm going to introduce some orange coloring in my midtones. The next part of this edit will involve using two masks. These two masks will be used in order to, first and foremost, introduce grain to our photo without affecting the very lightest parts of our highlights. And then we're going to reduce some dehaze from the background of our subject in order to create that dreamy look which you typically find in film photography. So I'm going to start by creating a luminance range, and immediately I'm going to reduce the range in order to select only the darkest parts and the shadows, and reduce the upper fall off in order to make sure that I'm not affecting my highlights. And then I'm going to navigate to the effects section and make sure I increase the grain to around 40%, and also play around with the size to see what looks best on this shot in particular. You can also play around with roughness of the grain, and this typically makes your grain more prominent in your shot. If we put too much of roughness, you can see that we can immediately see where our mask is effective versus where it is not. So we obviously don't want to overdo the roughness here. So the next task is to create a linear gradient, and this linear gradient will be very similar to what we used in previous tutorials, where we are going to intersect the mask with the subject in order to remove the subject from our masking. And I'm going to immediately go to the effects part and start dehazing my photo, and right here I'm also going to adjust the temperature by a bit in order to create a more vintage looking effect. right here. Next, I'm going to do one final step, and that is of going towards the lens correction section. I'm going to go to manual correction, and I'm going to add a bit of vignette and adjust the midpoint in order to set my darkest areas and make them sort of leading my eye towards the center of the shot, because that's where the subject of my shot is. If we compare the photo from the digital photo that we had and this shot that we just created, we can see that we've added a lot of grain, we've added that slight haze in the background, which makes the edges less sharp, and we've added that color cast which you would typically find in film photography. Now let's move over to another shot, and this time this is a shot I took with my mirrorless camera very recently, and I'm going to first and foremost crop this photo in order to achieve a composition that I like better. This is what I would go for. Now, I'm going to start off immediately with the tone curve, and I'm going to follow very similar ideas to what I just did with the previous photo. So crushing our blacks by a bit, then I'm going to increase my temperature by a bit and add a slightly magenta tint. And then I'm going to play around once again with the contrast and the shadows and blacks of my photo, as well as the highlights and whites in this scenario, because we have a very overexposed sky and also a slightly overexposed part of the street where it was sort of reflecting the white sky. Now, reducing contrast, I'm going to reduce highlights by a bit and also crush the shadows. And I'm going to increase the whites, which will play nicely when we start dehazing the background, because we will create that very dreamy effect and we will start losing a lot of detail from the background, which will also play very nicely with the grain that we're going to introduce in the next steps. Now I'm going to add some magenta color in my shadows, and this time I'm going to add some green to my highlights. And as you can see, if we reduce the luminance right here, the part of the road where it's reflecting the sky, it's taking that yellowish green effect, which is very typical of film photography. Now we're going to add our masks. Once again, we're going to use two different masks, a luminance range similar to what we used before, where we reduce the range of the luminance in order to select only the dark parts of the photo. Make sure that we're not affecting the highlights. I'm going to add grain, around 40% should work well. We're going to create a linear gradient mask which can overlap over our subject, because we're going to intersect that mask with the subject. And then I'm going to invert that mask. Now, haze the background, I'm going to reduce texture and clarity, and then I'm going to play around with the exposure and contrast and make sure I lose a lot of detail from my blacks. One last thing we're going to do is once again introducing a vignette to our shot. If we compare the two shots, we've gone from this overexposed, quite unusable shot, I would say, there was really nothing interesting in this shot, to this very nice film looking shot, and we can even play around a bit further with the shadows and the highlight color grade we did in order to make our film effect look even better. Similar to what we did in other videos, we can certainly create a preset out of this edit and make sure to select the masking as well. We're going to name this film look and save it, so we have it right here. Now we can obviously use this new preset for our film look to edit our photos that we have. And for example, we can select this particular photo, and as you can see, it's a bit too dark, but we can obviously adjust that by fixing our shadows and our blacks and maybe adjusting the temperature and tint right here to create that extra vintage look. Cropping it a bit, and now we can see that we have a very nice film looking shot once again. So I hope you liked the tips that I provided here in order to achieve a film look. Obviously, if you're one of those people who tends to like film look better than digital photography but have never tried out a film camera and you would like to achieve that film look with your digital photos, this would be a very good point to start with. Please make sure to like and subscribe for similar tutorials, and thank you for watching.